The rain poured mercilessly as 12-year-old Ellie huddled beneath the awning of Joe's diner, her stomach growling louder than the thunder overhead. Inside, single father Mark Wilson watched her through the steamy window, his heart breaking at the sight. Neither could have imagined that this moment would change both their lives forever, or that 15 years later, Ellie would return to fulfill a childhood promise that would leave an entire town in tears. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories that remind us of the power of human connection and promises kept against all odds. Mark wiped down the counter of his small diner for the third time that hour, his movements mechanical as exhaustion weighed on his shoulders. The evening rush had ended, leaving only a few regulars nursing cups of coffee. Through the rain-streaked windows, he noticed a small figure huddled under the awning outside, a girl, no older than his own daughter, soaked to the bone and shivering. "Hey, Patty," watched the register for a minute, he called to his longtime waitress before grabbing an umbrella and stepping outside. The girl flinched when the door opened, ready to run. "You okay out here?" Mark asked gently. "It's pretty nasty weather to be sitting outside." She looked up with wary eyes. "I'm fine," she mumbled, though her chattering teeth betrayed her. "You look cold and hungry. Want to come in for some hot chocolate?" "On the house." Hesitation crossed her face before hunger won out. "I don't have any money." "Did I ask for any?" Mark smiled. "I'm Mark Wilson. I own this place." "Ellie," she replied cautiously. "Ellie Summers." Inside, Mark settled her at a corner booth and brought over hot chocolate and a plate of pancakes with scrambled eggs. He noticed how she ate, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, as if afraid someone might take the food away. "When's the last time you ate, Ellie?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. She shrugged, avoiding his eyes. "Yesterday morning, maybe." Mark felt a familiar ache in his chest, the same one he'd felt 5 years ago when his wife walked out, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. "Where are your parents?" "Mom's sick," Ellie said carefully. "She forgets things sometimes. Like shopping. Or me." Mark understood the unspoken truth. He'd seen enough in this small town of Millfield to recognize the signs of neglect. "I have a daughter about your age. Lily. She's at home with our neighbor right now." Ellie nodded, scraping the last bits of egg from her plate. "You know," Mark said casually, "I always make too much food. Hazard of running a diner, I guess. If you wanted to stop by after school sometimes, I could use help eating the leftovers." For the first time, a genuine smile crossed Ellie's face. "Really? Really? No strings attached." That night marked the beginning of a routine. Ellie would appear at the diner after school, sometimes helping with simple tasks like filling salt shakers or folding napkins in exchange for a hot meal. Mark never pried too deeply, but he learned enough. Her mother struggled with addiction, there was never enough food at home, and Ellie had become adept at fending for herself. One afternoon, Ellie arrived with a black eye she couldn't explain. Mark called social services that night. The investigation revealed conditions worse than anyone had imagined. Ellie's mother was deemed unfit, and with no other relatives willing to take her, Ellie faced foster care. The night before she was scheduled to leave, she sat at her usual booth, pushing food around her plate. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "What if they're mean? What if they don't let me come back here?" Mark had been wrestling with a decision for days. His small apartment above the diner barely had room for him and Lily, and taking on another child meant financial strain. But watching Ellie's shoulders slump in defeat made the decision clear. "What if you stayed here?" he asked quietly. Ellie's head snapped up. "What?" "I've been talking to the social worker. It's complicated, but, if you want, I could become your foster parent. You'd share a room with Lily, and it wouldn't be fancy, but—" He didn't finish before Ellie launched herself across the table, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Yes. Please, yes. The adjustment wasn't easy. Lily, initially territorial, resented sharing her father's attention. Ellie, unused to rules and structure, tested boundaries. Mark, already stretched thin running the diner and raising one child, now had two preteen girls with emotional wounds to heal. But slowly, they formed a makeshift family. Lily taught Ellie how to braid hair and navigate middle school politics. Ellie showed Lily how to climb trees and find beauty in small things. Mark learned to referee arguments, dry tears, and somehow keep the diner afloat despite the added expenses. On Ellie's 13th birthday, Mark saved enough to buy her a second-hand bicycle, her first real gift. That night, as they sat on the fire escape outside their apartment eating birthday cake, Ellie grew serious. "Mark?" she asked, using his name as she always did, never quite comfortable calling him Dad despite his legal guardianship. "Why did you help me?" "Nobody else ever did." Mark considered the question. "Because everyone deserves someone who sees them. Really sees them." Ellie nodded, processing his words. "I'm going to pay you back someday. When I'm grown up and rich. I'll take care of you like you took care of me." Mark chuckled. "You don't owe me anything, kiddo." "I do," she insisted with the fierce determination that characterized everything she did. "And I promise, when I'm rich and successful, I'll come back and marry you and take care of you forever." Mark laughed, ruffling her hair. "That's not how it works, but I appreciate the sentiment." "You'll see," Ellie said, her young face solemn with conviction. "I promise." The years passed in a blur of school projects, part-time jobs, and the daily struggles of a single father raising two girls. Mark's diner barely stayed afloat during the recession, but they managed. Ellie blossomed from a wary child into a determined teenager with a sharp mind for numbers and a talent for computers. When college acceptance letters arrived during her senior year, Ellie received a full scholarship to MIT. The night before she left for Boston, she and Mark sat at the diner after closing, sharing pie like they had hundreds of times before. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I'm not good enough?" "You are," Mark assured her. "You're the strongest person I know." "I wouldn't be without you," she said, eyes shining with tears. "I haven't forgotten my promise." Mark smiled. "Just be happy. That's all I want for you." Ellie left for college, and life continued. Lily married her high school sweetheart and moved to Chicago. Mark's diner struggled as chain restaurants opened nearby. His hair grayed, his back ached more often, but he kept going. Communication with Ellie grew sporadic. She called on holidays, sent occasional texts, but was consumed by her studies and then her career. Mark followed her success through social media, a prestigious internship, a job at a tech startup, then founding her own company. He saved every newspaper clipping that mentioned her name, proud beyond words but increasingly aware of the distance between them. 10 years after Ellie left for college, Mark received devastating news. The building housing his diner had been sold to developers. The new owners tripled the rent, making it impossible for him to stay. After 30 years, Joe's Diner would close its doors. On the final day, Mark served free meals to longtime customers, accepting hugs and well wishes with a brave smile that didn't reach his eyes. At 62, he faced starting over with minimal savings and no clear path forward. As he wiped down the counter one last time, the bell above the door jingled. Mark looked up, his customary greeting dying on his lips. Ellie stood in the doorway, no longer the gangly teenager who'd left for college, but a poised woman in a tailored suit. Her eyes, however, were the same, determined, direct, seeing everything. "You're closing," she said, taking in the packed boxes and empty shelves. Mark nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Ellie walked slowly around the diner, trailing her fingers over the worn countertop, the vintage jukebox, the booth where she'd eaten her first meal here. Finally, she turned to face him. "Do you remember what I promised you when I was 13? Mark smiled sadly. Kids say a lot of things. I wasn't just any kid, Ellie replied. And I meant every word. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the counter between them. I bought the building. And the 2 adjacent ones. Mark stared at her, uncomprehending. I'm not asking you to marry me, Ellie continued with a small smile. That part was childish. But the rest? Taking care of you like you took care of me? That stands. She opened the folder, revealing architectural plans. I'm establishing a foundation. The Mark Wilson Community Center. It will include an updated diner, still called Joe's, still run by you if you want, plus affordable housing upstairs, a food pantry, and resources for foster families and at-risk youth. Mark's hands trembled as he looked at the plans. Ellie, I can't accept this. You can, because it's not just for you. It's for all the other Ellies out there. Her voice softened. You saved me, Mark. Not just from hunger or a bad home situation. You showed me what family could be. You gave me a foundation to build on. You did the hard work, Mark protested. Because you believed I could. Ellie took his weathered hands in hers. Let me do this. Let me keep my promise. Tears spilled down Mark's cheeks as he nodded, unable to speak. The renovation took 8 months. Mark consulted on every detail, ensuring the new diner maintained the charm of the original while updating what needed modernizing. The community center opened with fanfare, becoming a beacon for the struggling town. Mark ran the diner for 5 more years before semi-retiring, training a young single mother as his replacement while remaining as a mentor. Ellie visited regularly, her tech company now valued in the billions but her heart still tied to the small town where she'd found salvation. On the 5th anniversary of the center's opening, Ellie stood before a crowd of community members, her voice steady as she spoke. People often ask why I invested so much in this small town when I could be living a glamorous life elsewhere. The answer is simple: promises matter. When I was 12 years old, a man who had every reason to look the other way instead saw a hungry child and offered food without judgment. That single act of kindness changed the trajectory of my life. She gestured to Mark, now 72 but still standing tall. I promised to come back and take care of him when I was rich. It wasn't about money, it was about recognizing that we're all responsible for each other. That's what this center represents. Not charity, but community. Not handouts, but hands joined together. Mark joined her at the podium, his eyes misty. Ellie taught me more than I ever taught her. She showed me that family isn't about blood, it's about who stays when it would be easier to walk away. As they embraced, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Their story, of a promise made by a hungry child and kept by a successful woman, reminded everyone that sometimes the most powerful bonds are forged in the most unlikely circumstances. Today, the Mark Wilson Community Center serves thousands annually. Ellie's foundation has expanded to create similar centers in 20 other communities, each one built around a simple diner where anyone hungry can find a meal, no questions asked. And in Millfield, Mark still sits at the counter most mornings, greeting customers and occasionally telling the story of a rainy night and a promise that seemed impossible at the time, but changed everything. Sometimes, the family we choose becomes the foundation upon which we build our lives. And sometimes, a simple promise, "I'll come back for you," becomes the most powerful force for good in an uncertain world.